Hello, thank you for joining us today for the AWWA webinar on leak monitoring, More Than Just Nice to Have, presented by Mueller. I'm Emily Burdett with the American Water Works Association, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, here are some tips to enhance your webinar experience. We recommend you close email, instant messengers, and any other programs not currently in use as they interfere with the smooth reception of the webinar, causing slide buffering and poor sound quality. If you do experience a loss of audio or video, please first try exiting GoToWebinar and rejoining. Technical assistance can be found at the GoToWebinar technical support page at the link listed in your handouts and on the slide shown. I also need to inform you that the mention of specific products or services in this webinar does not represent a WWA endorsement. AWWA does not endorse or improve products or services. We will hold an audience Q&A following the panel discussion, so feel free to submit a question at any time throughout this broadcast by using the question pane at the lower right of your screen. We'll try our best to answer as many questions as we can during the live broadcast. I'll also personally ask if you put the name of the speaker that you're hoping to have answer your question at the beginning. I might be able to help get it to them easier. I'm pleased to introduce our distinguished panel of experts from Mueller Water Products. Corey Kiefer, North American Sales Manager at Mueller, and Asha Budlal, Manager of Field Services. So let's get started with the question, why leak monitoring is nice to have. Corey, could you speak to that for a moment?
So leak monitoring provides, a suite of tools and methodologies, that helps utilities evaluate and manage water loss in a more effective manner. Also having the ability to be proactive instead of reactive has helped utilities, optimize their operations by identifying leaks earlier, monitoring their progression to kind of help prioritize those repairs. We see non-revenue water, that's been a driver for these types of technologies. But, we're starting to see more environmental concerns along with risk mitigation becoming bigger drivers, as well. So, I would really say overall, it's the efficient water management on the utility and the distribution network that's been driving, these types of technologies in the industry.
Thank you. Now, Asha, how has technology progressed in leak monitoring from field operations and tactical, but to more automated systems, right?
Right. So traditionally, utilities have been very reactive. This is the age-old approach to leak detection. So this is sending operational crews out in response to events like customer complaints, surfacing water, or a low pressure event. With the continued emphasis on reducing water loss as well as the environmental concerns, as Corey mentioned, they have in time progressed to doing a more proactive approach. And this can include starting with one-time surveys. So utilities have used acoustic loggers in order to conduct surveys within their system. This can happen once or with some regularity by sending their crews out with this equipment to survey the area. Both of these methods have been very effective, as we've seen, but not necessarily the most efficient with use of resources for a lot of utilities. So with a lot of the technology progression over the last 10 years, we've seen the adoption of permanent leak detection or leak monitoring into this space. And this has allowed for utilities to really monitor their systems on an ongoing basis. So it's allowed utilities and their operations teams to be more efficient overall, and allows crews to address problems based on highest priority or location criticality, as in collaboration with other parts of their business. Leak monitoring in general and permanent leak monitoring has helped utilities with giving them additional information that they could not have found otherwise. So when did this leak start? How long has this leak potentially been running for? Are there any acoustic or other characteristics about this particular potential leak or event that are similar to things that you've seen in the past? And all of these bits of additional information help utilities with better leak classification overall and more efficient work in the field. Secondly, the ability to both correlate between sensors or use loggers as single sensors has allowed a comparison to historical data. So creating a baseline using those sensors and then seeing how that signal has changed with time. Both of these approaches have overall just allowed utilities to find more leaks within their system, especially those non-surfacing leaks that they would not have been able to find previously, either by having to wait until they responded or the leaks not showing themselves at the time of their previous surveys. So this has been really beneficial. And lastly, just the mere analysis techniques that have been applied to a lot of these types of technologies is very significant. So using things like machine learning that continuously learns and adapts as we grow or as the technology grows has allowed humans and technology to pair their skill sets together to improve the overall approach. As a whole, I'd say our leak detection toolbox of today is probably at the best that we've seen in time.
That is a fantastic thing to think about. And what level of automation exists in the leak monitoring today?
That's a great question, Emily. Yeah, so there is a significant level of automation that exists with leak monitoring today. And in my mind, there's two real ways that we've seen this in the industry. The first is more logistical. So it speaks to having that recording flexibility. And so permanent leak monitoring has allowed utilities to preset the time and the time of day that they've been able to record their data and actually have this continue on a regular basis. Additionally, with the sensors record, you can often decide things like how often and at what frequency would I like to record, and in some cases for how long. So all of this information gets collected by the sensors automatically and uploaded to a server for additional analysis, which can then help with actionable results. And the second automation, which leads right into this, is the analysis. And this is the real star of the show here for a lot of these technologies. They have automated analysis workflows which help to qualify data that's being collected in the field and turn it into information. So with the use of things like artificial intelligence, the technology is able to sift through thousands of data points that are being collected from these sensors and provide utilities and your field crews with actionable insights that they're able to go to the field with to do additional leak detection for verification. And then ultimately determine what is or is not a leak and proceed towards doing repairs as needed for that particular event or leak.
That's fantastic. We've come so far. Well, let's hear from the audience. We actually have a poll set up so that you all can answer a question here and we can really speak to the needs of you and our audience. So we'll go ahead and launch that poll. I'll go ahead and let you know that's just a yes, no question, but let me read this out to you all so that you can answer. So, are you seeing compliance mandates as they pertain to environmental concerns? Please let us know yes or no, and we'll see where you all stand so that our panelists can speak to that today. I want to give everyone another maybe 30 seconds to go ahead and answer that. So go ahead and just click the answer on your screen as you see it in front of you, and then we'll keep going. I'll give you till 11:10 my time, Mountain Time. Okay. So let's see the results of that. So not a perfect split, but we definitely have a few more people finding that they are seeing compliance mandates as they pertain to environmental concerns. So let's go ahead and speak to both of those situations. Corey, as someone at Mueller, how are you seeing the effects of non-revenue water?
Yeah, so and that poll was good, and it was interesting to see the responses to it because
Agreed.
we've seen huge loss in efficiencies. More money being spent on the operations, along with higher costs to produce water. Based on additional supplies, treatment resources, those types of things. I think we're also seeing some additional government and regulatory concerns across the country. And it's just beyond, the regions that are dealing with droughts, here in the Northeast as well. We're just seeing a lot more of these mandates coming into play, as non-revenue water pertains to this. And also, getting into kind of the increase in climate resiliency, reducing energy consumptions, which really is a byproduct, in my opinion, of reducing the water loss, pumping stations and those types of things, and the cost and the kind of carbon footprint that you see, with some of these water losses and high NRWs. And I think overall, I think we'll continue to see, vast improvements through not only technology, but education and training. I think that's been a big driver as well, as far as, what is NRW. And there's a lot of, parts of the country they've never really had to pay attention to NRW, So now that some of these things are coming in with state mandates, obviously, from a public, relations, we've seen some of the utilities across the country, with no water, and trying to deal with that as well, from that standpoint. So that's really, kind of where we're seeing, the effects of non-revenue water.
Okay. Now, have you seen the environmental effects improve, I should say?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Again, back to that poll, right? Because as we, I talked a little bit about it, and Ash has talked a little bit about it. The environmental drivers now for leak detection have become much more prevalent. We've worked with utilities that they're being fined, for these leaks, and they're draining it, leaking into creeks and rivers and these types of things, and ultimately, killing fish and other wildlife. So we dealt with a utility that, I think there were roughly over $1 million they had been fined. They counted the fish, as they went through, and they actually went through and how many ever fish that they killed, and they started to get these fines. But they were able to negotiate a significant credit to those fines. And the state, kind of required them to be proactive and invest in leak detection technology. They went ahead and deployed a lot of this, and again, lowered their NRW as a byproduct of this. But really the driver was that environmental concern. And again, interesting to see the poll that I believe that's going to be more and more across the country. This technology is going to be a driver for the environmental, for the risk mitigation type, and not just a continued driver for NRW. And, they ended up, the utility had an ROI like within 9 months, obviously with the credits and everything that they came into. And then they use that funding, that other, reallocated resources into expanding, into their technology, even beyond leak detection with pressure and those other types of things. So I think we're going to start to see a lot from the environmental side and also risk mitigation as a byproduct of the NRW, not driven by just the non-revenue water.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, Ashley, let's come back to you, because do companies deploy any type of algorithms in leak monitoring industry, and what is your experience with setting up these types of the technology secrets that you have?
Everybody always wants to know about the technology secrets. Definitely. So permanent monitoring by nature allows for the collection of thousands of data points, as I mentioned earlier, more than we've ever been able to collect using some of the more traditional means. And so algorithms are absolutely essential for decision making based on this. It's not just collection of data that's sufficient, but being able to interpret this data to make it actually useful, and providing information to users and to utilities so that they can action on it. For a lot of technology providers, experience over the years has been based on their baseline of experience with customers and with the industry, and they've used that to create their baseline algorithms. But as these technologies have developed, they've started to integrate by using actual data collected from human experience doing analysis, but also, and more importantly, feedback from the field and from the utilities, completing a full cycle loop of integration and improvement towards their algorithms. At the end of the day, it's a continuous learning process of improvement and ensuring that you can always continue to find leaks efficiently and find leaks that are harder to find. The goal with these technologies is to be able to cater for different types of scenarios, different environmental conditions, and being able to apply these algorithms to various sites to allow for performance and leak detection when stretched across multiple utilities, and as well as continued improvements towards leak detection. So absolutely, algorithms are essential, and each technology will have their own secret sauce that they put into it to ensure that the technology itself is successful.
Hopefully secret sauce is not trademarked somewhere. We're allowed
Yeah, there you go.
So Corey, you talked before. Let's talk a little bit more. How does leak technology help reallocate the resources?
Yeah, this is always an interesting topic because we hear a lot about how this is going to start to replace, the workforce, this type of technology. You always get into it no matter what it is when it comes to, any type of AI or, kind of machine learning type of technology. But what we're really finding is, the fact that the utilities are dealing with shortages in their workforce, really. And you have a lot of the, workforce that's doing jobs otherwise they weren't hired for, and they're doing double duties and overtime and all those other things. So I think this is actually helping to reallocate those resources, right, for the crews to be much more efficient. An example being prioritizing and scheduling repairs as opposed to costly emergency call outs and those types of things. I think that's definitely one of the benefits. The other is the workforce isn't going to lose the workforce by reallocating. What we're talking about is instead of going out into these emergency leaks, they're going to schedule these leaks. They're still going to have the same work, right? It's still going to be, but it's going to be much more efficient as how they were able to do this. We also talk about the funding side of this, right? Reallocating resources from the funding. We've seen this again, in the example I gave, with the utility from the environmental side of that and the fines that they have. You're now able to reallocate those fundings to beyond leak detection, as I talked about before, is pressure management, water quality. Those types of things are going to be much more involved in as the and leak detection systems evolve. These are going to be part of the evolution of leak detection. So we've seen it firsthand how it's helped utilities scale their leak detection programs and run much more efficient. So to me, I think this is a real driver, and this is education also, as to we get out there and talk about leak detection and how we talk about reallocating resources as opposed to, replacing the human element.
Yeah, truly that more than just nice to have reasoning.
Yeah.
So I think we should go. We have questions coming in from our audience. We want to hear what they're thinking about and their thought process. Is there anything though that you want to add to any of the questions I've already asked or anything, or do we want to get to those audience questions?
I think we're good with the audience questions.
Yeah,
Let's jump in.
Let's see what they're asking. So I think I'll work through these in the order that they came in, so we kind of follow their thought process. So I'll just go ahead and see what Jennifer had to say here. Now, Jennifer, actually, you asked a great question that I did want to reiterate. You said, this is being recorded and we'll receive a copy of the recording. So yes, you'll have availability to the recording after as well. So you can go back through some of these talking points if you'd like, if you're watching with us live, or if anyone, of course, they're not here now, but if they had to jump off, we'll be able to see this discussion later if you'd like to share it with your colleagues, you can look into doing that. So after that, we have Salah asking, what is the accuracy of your system? Asha, I bet you could talk to that a little bit, and probably Corey could chime in as
Yeah.
well.
I'll let Asha speak to that, as she's much more involved in the operations side of that.
Great, go ahead, Asha.
Yeah, overall, with acoustic technologies, we can see accuracy saying 3 out of 4 events being found being actual leaks in overall. Now you will see some differences across different technologies in the application of correlation versus noise loggers, but overall pretty high accuracy from that perspective.
Yeah, that
Yeah, and,
sounds
I'd add one thing to that as well, right? Is we start to talk about AI, machine learning, a managed service, type of offering that is really helping the you know how we scale, as to this and start to grow the percentages, and as to what Asha talked about, right, and the accuracy of these technologies. And I think, from our own experience, starting to implement a lot of these types of, AI and other things, we're seeing the accuracy, and I think we've actually even got data to it that has climbed dramatically over the last year or two as we integrate these types of offerings.
so it's really moving in just the last couple of years. That is fascinating. Um, Jose is touching on something we haven't talked about yet. Permanent acoustic leak correlations depend heavily on the utility's GIS asset. Does Mueller provide best practices for GIS so that the proactive leak detect is more accurate in the field?
Yeah, and I can touch on this quickly, Asha, and you can kind of go about it as to,
Sure.
again, speaking from our experience in the industry, and I'm sure, there's technologies across as to how we do this, but we do take the GIS. We upload all the GIS information, all the data. We have, call maps and all those other things that we use to integrate the GIS information. So yes, that is a big part. And actually, the more accurate the GIS is, the more accurate the system is going to be. And that is some of the things that we find that you got to be very careful of, right, is to make sure that the GIS is updated, make sure the GIS is accurate. And one of the things that we always recommend because of this is that, at the end of the day, these tools and these systems are help, be able to monitor and get these leaks before they, become catastrophic events. But we always recommend to go in the field and confirm, right? To measure off, to be able to measure off and confirm with the correlation. That is something that I would heavily suggest, because if your GIS is off, because that's what our systems and a lot of the systems are based off, if that GIS is off by 10 or 12 feet, the chances are you're going to dig a dry hole. So we always recommend going in the field, even though we do have the GIS information. And I think that's a very key point to being efficient with these types of systems. They can only do so much, right? And there are still some, again, human element to this in the field for investigation. Asha, I mean, would you agree with that?
Totally. And just to add to what Corey said, all of the technologies will generally work up front with the utilities GIS system and let them know the quality, if it meets, or if there's the work that needs to be done to that source data or geodatabase in whatever format, to make it adoptable or importable into these types of systems. And just to harp on Corey's last part there, we talked about a leak detection toolbox. This is a tool for your toolbox to be paired with on-site investigation and a lot of the traditional methods. So it's by no means meant to replace anything, but just enhance existing processes and practices on site, inclusive of that field verification. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think our next question from Jay is that same kind of idea of like, is good data needs to go in, correct, for good data to come out. So the question is, with the AI machine learning, is there a level of effectiveness based on the level of availability in AMI deployment in your system?
Yeah, you start talking about the AMI side of that, right? That's a part of, at least for us, the system as well, right? And AMI and the metering side and those types of things, obviously with the accuracy, I think it plays the same role. As far as the more accurate they are, there's a little bit more, automation right now that we have into the metering side of the world and the AMI side of the world. I think leak detection is catching up, right? So AMI is a pretty mature market, a pretty mature technology that, over the last 20 years has developed. And I really believe leak detection is at that point now with the infancy where AMI was maybe 15 years ago. So we are really, for us as a company, emphasizing, kind of being able to integrate those same tools, having the advantage of, being able to offer that AMI side of the business. But relevant to that, I think the leak detection side of the world is catching up. And Ashley, you can add a little bit more because you're more involved in that side of it. But if you have anything to add based on kind of where we're seeing it go in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. So to complement what Corey said with the AMI network, I think you'll see the scale of leak detection is growing, more akin to what we have seen with the AMI industry as a whole. But I'll also just add just a point of clarification for a lot of these technologies with permanent leak detection, a lot of their communications networks are cellular based, which does provide a lot of additional flexibility with uploading and data collection that we're seeing in this industry, which is very significant for leak detection and allows for ultimately more leaks to be found with various utilities.
I hadn't even thought about that yet. That's a great point.
Yeah, and just a quick to that, and I don't know if it goes into the question, and to Ash's point, right, when you talk about AMI, when we think of AMI here, we think of infrastructure, collectors, those types of things. And I think, the point being here is that with our cellular, being able to still come into that same system as it mirrors into the collectors as well. We just found from a leak detection standpoint, because the packet of information is much larger than from the metering side where you're just getting a read and a serial number, that we've seen some struggles when it comes to collectors. And that's why we feel, and a lot of other, competitors or in the market, the same type of manufacturers in the market, I think are starting to see the same. And that's where you're seeing the growth with the cellular side of the leak detection side.
Okay. Well, let's ask our next question. We have definitely a few more to ask. Let's see. We have from Benjamin. Hello, Benjamin. What does the average industry leak detection equipment, sensors, and infrastructure look like today? They continue as in, is it typical today that leak detection infrastructure is incorporated during pipe repair, replacement, or new construction, or is it more typical to involve a mobile, self-propelled, or remotely operated equipment involving sensors that is directed through a pipe network? So perhaps we could speak broadly and then more specifically to that.
I think I understand the question, right, as to where it pertains. Where we really see, especially, in the Northeast and others, where the oldest aging infrastructure, downtown, as far as those types of things, where the oldest pipe is, the biggest risk areas, right, near hospitals, those types of things, public transportation. So we see from our standpoint, as far as the permanent drivers, and I believe this is, as to what the question is asked, is that is really where we start, and always the concern for us. The other side of it, when it comes to, we have other technologies, you start getting into beyond, permanent leak detection, as Asha spoke to a little bit earlier, start getting the condition assessment where we provide leak detection, where, you can have the leak detection as well as you're doing that as a service. And then as you run, as that service and you start to understand the condition of the pipe, understanding maybe the leaks of the pipe with maybe some predictive modeling, then you can start to focus there. There also is a hybrid, and I think what they were talking about, what we call in the industry a lift and shift, right? That's to be able to put remote loggers out and let them overnight and then move them in other areas. I think we've seen hybrids that have been very effective that way, utilizing permanent and, what we call lift and shift in the same system, so that you can keep those in the permanent areas that have the most risk, and then be able to do some evaluation, lift and shift in through those mobile sensors. I believe that is what the question was. Ashley, you want to kind of add to it?
The one thing I'll add to that, because I think he was asking about just how and where these would get deployed within a typical utility cycle. And I'll just speak to the operational logistical part of that. That's more my background as well. As these get deployed, I do want to note that a lot of them are non-destructive. So this is typically not something that you have to put inside of your pipe. So there isn't really a need for integrating this into, a pipe downtime or dewatering program by any means. So there really is no bad time to put these in, but there is a way to strategically place them in your network depending on what your overarching goals are for your utility. So logistically, I just wanted to mention that in terms of when to put them in operationally, they're by and large very simple to deploy and don't require too much of downtime from the network or disruption to a lot of the service.
Okay, that's good to know.
Hopefully that answered the question.
I think we did. Benjamin, if you have a follow-up question, feel free to put it in. I will say we are 30 minutes in and we have a number of questions we're going to keep going through of yours. But if you have one, go ahead and put it into the box at the bottom right of your screen. Also, if we don't reach every question, we should be able to get them in front of our speakers today and they might still be able to speak to you about it if it's something that they can answer. So let's keep going though, because Leonard asked next, as we were speaking before, we have a 2,000 customer distribution system, which is about 30 to 90 years old. We have a 25% water loss. What leak detection frequency is recommended for this type of system?
I would say for us across the board, if we look at what type, acoustic leak detection, right? That's pretty much prevalent in the industry. There are some technologies with, satellite types of technologies, right? And it's been able to sense, as far as being able to see from a ground standpoint. But acoustic technology in that, what specifically speaking to their utility and what they have in the 25% non-revenue water, we really feel that the acoustic technology has been the best adapter. It's easy to kind of pick from a GIS standpoint, layout, do node placements, as Ashley talked about before. Very simple to deploy. You don't have to shut down your network or anything. And also, again, if we talked about it before, if you have those services, 2,000 services, right? If you want to scale to any other type of technology into starting to monitor, read meters, or those types of things, I think there's a lot of the technology out there has the ability to scale. And it's a point of, if you start with even a small area, right, to deploy, you don't have to deploy the whole system. Start with a small area, especially with a 25% non-revenue water, then you'll be able to justify, you'll be able to see and track over a 90-day or a 60-day, kind of pilot or proof of concept that we like to call it. And then you'll be able to justify, the return on investment and then scaling up the system. I think that's very important for everyone to understand, is that is pretty much kind of what we've seen as far as each utility. They like to start in an area. Some may start with 100, 200, or even 50 to be able to prove it out. We run a program that says, okay, here's the criteria, here's what you're looking for. At the end of this 90 days or 180 days, did we accomplish what we were looking for? What was the amount of leaks found? What would we estimate the amount of water was there? And then be able to show the return on investment. And also, I think you're starting to see a lot in the industry where we are grants for these types of things, right? With high NRW. We've had a couple in our area where if you qualified, over 15% water loss, there's grants out there available. And I think our company is trying to help the utilities in the business by being able to go find and these grants and help utilities, when it comes to applying for these grants. Would you agree with that, Ash, on these points?
Totally, completely. And just I would say for anyone getting started, to go back to the point of it pairing with your current system, we would ask you, what are you currently doing today? It sounds like you have a pretty good understanding of your NRW at 25%, but what are you also doing to complement that? Are there ways that you can determine using DMAs or pressure management where those losses are coming from? Those would be great areas to target. I would ask if you have any reactive or proactive leak detection survey technology that you use today, and how would a technology like this complement what you're currently using or what you already have? And so that's just to add to everything that Corey said, that's how I would start to approach this with you.
Yeah. And Corey, I like that you touched on the grants, because that is one of our questions here from Talal is there federal funding for this type of program, but specifically inside the infrastructure bill signed by the president last year in Buy Better, Build Better. So I think it's something that our audience will be glad to hear that you all at Mueller will perhaps help them seek it out, or if they're using any person in the marketplace, it's part of the discussion is finding those grants. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've in our experience, we had one, in the Northeast, which ended up being, I think from the infrastructure bill, right? And I believe that the way that it worked is they had a total amount for the grant. You could apply for the grant, and then they split it into three different ones that were awarded the grant. We were able to help, as far as those things, and even coming into it, and we start to talk about the environmental. Carbon footprint was a big driver for that. We saw some of the utilities that didn't qualify because they didn't own the pump stations, right? There was no justification on carbon footprint. So I think a lot of that is out there. I don't think that, we've done a good enough job for us as a company that we're starting to really focus on to go look for those grants and to help the utilities apply for those grants. And when they do come to us, being able to have the right people, as far as grant writers and those types of things to be able to do it. I think that should really be a focus right now, especially as we're talking about, these bills that are being rolled out, the money that's going into infrastructure and those things. I think we're trying to help do a better job to help utilities and customers as well with that.
Understood. Good. Um, do you think that there is a reduced interest in leak detection and management for private dwellings when the priority for non-enforcement of water laws and the lack of enforcement of recommendations for environmental efficiency concerns, allowing parks and golf courses have healthy, well-watered lawns, and the homeowners are encouraged to remove their lawns and pay for increased use of water? So I think Glenn's wanting to drill down into that a little bit.
If I understand correctly, I would say the privates, a big difference between the private utilities entities and the public utilities. We've actually seen the private adapt to this type of technology. Again, there's they still have under different, like the PUC and all those other different mandates and things that are coming down. So I think overall, to answer the question, we've seen the privates adapt to this, but again, remembering that funding, money availability, budgets, those types of things are much easier also for privates to be able to invest in this. And I think that's a real struggle, as we just talked about for public utilities and municipalities, is getting the funding and having the capital, being able to get the capitalization and again working it into some of these systems from a service side where we're trying to help that you can capitalize or put it into operations, right, as to where they're going to have the funding. And that is one of the things we also try to focus on with the public utilities, because we understand the challenges. We see it as far as us as well in the industry. And Ashley, I think you've dealt with a lot of that, the private utilities for years, and I think you can speak to it as well. And I think we're trying to help the public get there, but the privates have really adapted to this technology.
Absolutely. We've seen them enhance their existing programs with this type of technology, and very quickly, as Corey mentioned on some of our earlier case studies, see return on their investments, which have allowed them to create business cases for additional expansion and additional investment, where they think that they've seen it needed the most, whether it be high cost of water or environmental concerns or other. The host of why is quite a long list of why a utility might need to do this, but absolutely a lot of strong adoption with the utilities. And then just to speak to, I believe one of the topics in the question was, with a focus on golf courses and private utilities and them being more conservative. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of this, especially on the West Coast. Drought conditions are at the front page of everybody's news feeds when we're looking at a lot of our West Coast utilities, and there is that strong focus on cutting back, and in some cases we've seen in some of our California clients almost making it very publicly known who the big water users are. So there is that need to advocate for conservation and maybe a bit of public education here. So I think us in the industry, we know what the problems are. We've been dealing with it. We've been managing with it to the best of our ability so far. But with that public education and engagement and in some cases mandates for those private entities like golf courses and utilities, we only need to build on that within infrastructure. At the end of the day, infrastructure is still aging. We still anticipate that a lot of these utilities will continue to see breaks, especially as they get older and older. And there's only a finite amount of resources for replacement. And so it's very important to preserve and conserve the infrastructure that utilities currently have today.
Moving forward through the questions, I also think we'll all be interested to see what questions come out multiple times, where the concerns lie. So moving forward, Andrew asked soon after that, the technology that is currently out there still can only localize potential leaks, leak locations, correct? So employees are still needed to actually go in and pinpoint the actual leaks. And again, I think we've spoken on this a little bit already, but perhaps we can reiterate the manpower needed. And Corey, you said it would be scheduled, correct?
Yeah,
That's
I think that's the difference, right?
yeah.
And again, limited resources. I spoke to that, and again, this isn't going to be replacing, from what we can see in the industry, the workforce. What it's really going to do is, again, help manage efficiencies. And to the question, that is absolutely correct. We're able to pinpoint, right, within a plus or minus. The crew will still be needed to go out. We recommend, anyhow, from us, the crew to go out and be able to do, with the field correlator to measure it off and then pinpoint. Again, the difference being they can schedule these, and also having the ability of, when we first, deploy these systems, finding all the existing leaks. Now, these utilities can't go out and just repair all these leaks, right? If you, kind of commission the system and you've got 10 existing leaks, it's on companies like us, and I think it's been a big driver for us also in the advancement. And we got that from customers, right, as to what the customer needs are, and then to help to start prioritize. So they can go out and we can say, okay, we want you to focus on, these 2 leaks, where they can go and do the fielding investigation. We then have the ability to be able to monitor the other leaks to make sure, okay, what their progressions are. And so this really helps them prioritize the leak efficiently with the workforce to go out and schedule these and to be able to pinpoint these leaks. And then again, also, from the workforce to be able to do these repairs. It's much, the cost effectiveness as to an emergency repair. I mean, that would you agree with that, Ashley? I think that's really kind of how we push this.
Hit the nail on the head. Prioritization and efficiency. Those are really what you're getting by pairing these types of technologies with your field users. Again, what this tech is giving you is more information to help you make sure that you're able to be more successful when you do go out to site in a particular day. You can potentially find more with the same amount of resources, or be able to just efficiently prioritize where those are being spent. One thing to note that we haven't actually spoken too much of is just this is allowing you to do earlier detection as well. So what we're seeing with this tech is that because you're finding so many more non-servicing leaks, you're often able to find leaks in their infancy before they become catastrophic, before they become front page blowouts. And that is allowing you to save on so much in terms of repair costs down the line. So it's an upfront investment that will provide payback again and again.
So I think, Ash, I'd like to ask you a couple of these more specific questions that are coming in as people think through this technology. We can talk about some of the pieces. So Don wanted to know, Asha, you mentioned upload to server for the permanent leak detection units. How does that happen? Jennifer followed that with what different types of acoustic loggers are there? And then we have some questions of people being like, okay, can you remind us what's this whole system as we go farther in? So I'm not sure if this is as related, but we had a question like, how has your acoustic technology improved for PVC piping and such? So could you perhaps answer a couple of those more specific upload to server to the point you think is appropriate here, and perhaps you can follow up with these attendees later as well.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Great questions. Absolutely. So the way that a lot of the remote permanent logger infrastructure works is, as I mentioned, a lot of them are cellular based. I'd say the vast majority, when it speaks to loggers deployed. They all come equipped with a SIM card and a logger board, which allows for data to be recorded. So these units are often pre-scheduled to record at a certain time. They go off either daily or whatever frequency that's chosen by the user. They record their data, and then that gets transmitted via a cell network to a cloud or server situation, which then gets put into the technology's service for additional analysis and additional review of the feedback, again, turning data into information. And that's where the algorithms will then come into play to decipher which noise events, if we're talking about acoustic loggers, warrant additional attention, and which should be moved forward for either additional monitoring or potential field deployment, boots on the ground.
Okay, thank you for that.
You want me to follow up quickly with
Yeah,
the
Corey,
types?
please
Sure.
add to that.
Sure.
Yeah, so the types that are out there, we've seen multiple types, but valve-based was really the driver. That's what started in this industry, was deploying in valves, right? They had kind of the magnetic, again, with dropping down and the accelerometer and magnetic touching as a valve-based. We've, us as a company being one of the largest hydrant companies, in the world, have developed as a cap, a hydrant cap. That's kind of the adaptation where it stands is, being able to utilize both. They might be having the cap, and if you have hydrants that are too far apart, being able to use the valve-based as well. So I think there's multiple types of technology, and they hit on plastic, and I think we're going to kind of address that at the end, but we can address it now, where this is something we've really looked into, right? Because plastic is hard in any type of leak detection, especially at a point of if you're not touching the water column. So developing that type of technology with hydrophones, to be able to utilize on plastic. And there's parts of the country that are all plastic and haven't been able to utilize this permanent, kind of the enhancement of this. So I think that's where we're going with the plastic side is, yes, there is going to be technology for it. It is something we as a company have started to look into and are working on with it, to be able to utilize plastic with permanent leak detection.
Speaking of implementation, Matthew wanted to know, how does your leak detection system flow into AWWA's water loss audit? He said specifically version 6, as the industry moves away from NRW as a sole metric. That does seem interesting to me as well.
Yeah, that would be something, Ashley, would you be able to speak to that?
I think that would be someone that we'd be happy to follow up with a lot more information on that. I think it's going to be integrated in one way or another. I think we can't shy away from leak detection in the industry. It's a necessity. How that gets implemented as far as the AWWA structure, I think we'd have to look into a bit more to make sure that we're fully aligned with that particular piece of the test. Yeah.
I think we as a company pay attention to it, right? We're paying attention to it. And again, as it came out with SB 555, in California, that's where really the Senate bill and those types of things started, where we started to, like we do with customers, start to think about and utilizing and enhancing technology based on some of those, again, what the AWWA standards are going to be in those types of things. But as a company, I think that's something we're working on and very cognizant of, but that's probably something beyond, Ash and I to get into the down to the nitty gritty details in it.
Speaking of another nitty gritty, I just wanted to put it out there, but it might be a further offline discussion, is Talal asked, for costs of implementing this program, while the cost of data loggers are reasonably cheap, there seems to be a lack of transparency and clarity about costs of the data analysis, AI, and providing reports back to municipality. So they were asking for elaboration on the cost model itself. Can you speak broadly to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a little bit to it, Asha, and then you can speak to it. Again, us as a company, very transparent about it. Actually, it's one of the things that we kind of market. We have what we call a managed service, right? As far as the way that goes, there's a human element to it still. AI and machine learning can only go so far. So having the ability to have different types and different levels of service as well as to when you want to get that information, right? Is it something in a critical area where you need to be able to get, so many 4 times a day as opposed to just, overnight. So I think there's a scale of what that service looks like. We are very transparent about it. I mean, this is something offline if you want to follow up with us as far as talk further about it. But I think that's really key. As you said, it's the, recurring costs that you start to see in anything, cell service, those types of things. When you buy a phone, where's the real cost? So I think we as a company are very transparent about it. We actually market it because it's something that we're very proactive with as far as part of our program. So I can't really speak to kind of the rest of the industry, and I can't really give numbers to it, kind of where we are in a baseline. But if it's something they want to follow up with, we'd gladly follow up and answer any of those questions. Does that, Ashley, does that kind of cover?
Absolutely. The one piece I'll add is, and I think the crux of what the question may come from is understanding what your operating costs are going to be. Capital investment is one thing, but understanding year after year, how much do I have to invest in this for upkeep, for maintenance, and for day-to-day system running. And so I think, to Corey's point, that's something that we focus in a lot with our clients and customers, is understanding how are they trying to structure and understand this program, and how does it align with their internal budgets and goals.
And I think that it changes for private and public as this goes, right? Is to capitalize in that, or for an OpEx, right? Where are your budgets? If you have the capital to cover it, and then you kind of capitalize those recurring fees. We see that, starting to see that more and more as well. So I think those are some of the things that we've really focused on, as far as what's best for the utilities, the private, the public, and trying to understand how both operate and what the operational, kind of resourcing is.
A lot of our questions coming in are, I think it's great to see, because I think our audience is interested in the specificities of how it would benefit, leak detection would benefit them. I just wanted to ask one that came in a little later, because we have talked about that cell service, and quite a few of our audience members were just questioning, the rural system. They represent those rural municipalities. So Brian asked, what system technologies would you recommend for remote rural systems with little or no access to that cell service? Any recommendations for utility systems in the developing world as well?
Yeah, we've seen that challenge, and again, it's the different types of technologies, and even on the AMI side of the world, right, that you've seen this. I think some of the things, and you get to those types of areas where cell signal and others, we're starting to develop, technology that can pick up, any type of, and I think there's other out there, cells. So we've had areas where, we've deployed where Verizon has worked really well, but then as we started to deploy it in other areas, like they were speaking of in the rural areas, maybe it was AT&T or T-Mobile or those types of things. So I think not being able to kind of fully understand, kind of if there's no service, but I think as far as being able to pick up multiple services and bringing it back on the same, as far as our in the cloud and everything, that has been a real focus for us years ago, because we ran into this with larger deployments, to be able to have that scalability and utilize those different types of services. And sometimes it's multiple services in the same deployment. So I'm not sure if that specifically answered the question. I do understand the challenges from a cell standpoint. In the past, we've tried to use collectors and those types of things, but it is a challenge. Mm-hmm. It really is. And it's case by case.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, Asha, do you have anything to add to that?
Nothing to add. I think Corey covered it really well. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're in our last 5 minutes here, so I'll ask a final question that I'd like you all to speak to. I do want to reiterate, we had a lot of excellent questions come in, and so your speakers will see those, and you also can look at your handout for Asha and Corey's names and their titles at Mueller if you'd like to ask some of your questions again. Let's go ahead though and talk about, in this last 5 minutes, what do we see for the future of the leak industry, if you would call it that?
Yeah, I think we touched on one, is plastic. I think that's been a challenge for a while, in the industry. Even some utilities that have a mix, right, of kind of, cast or metallic and plastic. And, I think that's some of the things that we feel in the enhancement for us moving forward is being able to have a deployment that can have valve based, it can have, the cap, it can have, plastic and those types of things. I think that has been our focus. And I think that's something in the industry that we've seen that some utilities haven't been able to, see the benefits of leak detection because of that. We're also really starting to see, I would say, in the industry, predictive modeling. I think that is becoming a really big in our industry and starting to utilize predictive modeling. It's beyond the desktop model, and we start to get into some of these other softwares, that we've started to use as well as a company to help with the predictive modeling where these deployments should be, right? We start to talk about, well, they think the oldest aging infrastructure, these types of things, but that may not be, based on kind of some of this predictive modeling, where the history is, where all those breaks and leaks are. So I think that is something that we're starting to really focus on, look at softwares for, and Ashley can speak, a little bit more in detail on their side of it with the operations as to what that would look like in the focus, kind of moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that with the predictive modeling, I'll lead that into pipeline management for utilities. So permanent leak detection monitoring being paired with different types of technologies. Condition assessment is correlated into pressure detection, pressure management, and other types of technologies that work in tandem with leak detection in order to provide a better output. So using data from multiple sources to improve as a whole the way that utilities are able to operate, but also the way that asset managers are able to make decisions on things that are within their network. And lastly, I'll close it off on this question with a continued alignment with what utilities are looking for. What has driven this technology over time has been a need in the industry and a need of utilities to address these problems with a more technological approach. So this is going to lead to continued advancements in the algorithms and the secret sauce that we talked about earlier, to allow us to find more leaks, smaller leaks, be more sensitive in the field with our technologies, but also provide more information to our field technicians who are out investigating these to allow them to be more successful. And overall more alignment with operations, utility workers, and their crews in order to become overall more efficient. I think there's so much happening with the future of this. I'm pretty excited. I think we're very lucky to be in this industry. It's a nice niche to see where technology meets function, and I'm very excited to see how it continues to grow over time.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would say to that as well as Ashley had mentioned, I think everybody that's asking questions, right, that are looking for this and the different questions you see, again, the education, the training, those types of things that I think are going to be prevalent moving forward with this, because there are a lot of unknowns. There are a lot of, utilities that are trying to decide what technology is best for us, right? As you start to go out and a lot of technologies have, again, some of the things that are really strong at, and some of the other ones that, may not have the advancements of others do. But I think the hardest part for the utilities and those on the phone is trying to decide what technology is best for them, as you can start to see from these questions. And I think us as a company, we have started to really engage in that. Our development has been from customers. We've had large deployments where, look, we've gone through all the lessons learned and all those other types of things as others had, but we really take the voice of the customer. We make sure of that. We've got, individuals that are out there and getting feedback and working with the customers. So I think the enhancement, the development, and the future of this technology is really going to come from, those customers, the engineers, the consulting firms, and those types of things. So I think it's very important for companies like us to be able to go out there and get that feedback, to be able to help, and understand, because each one's going to be different, right? Each one's going to have their own, we hear that all the time. Well, there's a reference here, but we operate different. So I think for us as a company and others, is to be able to go in and be able to, whether it's 2,000 endpoints or whether it's 275,000 endpoints, right, to be able to customize to each of their needs. So I really think that's the future. And I think the future is really going to depend on the feedback we get from those that are, on this webinar and others that, we existing customers. So that's what I would say as kind of a closeout to this, is where I see the business going, the market going.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are out of time for today, but again, your questions will be provided to the panel so that they can reach out on those to you if we were unable to get to it. And thank you for those questions. Again, it really feeds the future of this industry. Now, as soon as we end the webinar, a window is going to open with a quick survey. We ask that all of you please take a few moments to complete the questionnaire. Your feedback is very important to us at AWWA as well, and will help us improve the webinar experience that we do for y'all, the webinar programming. Now, we hope you enjoyed today's webcast on leak monitoring, more than just nice to have, presented by Mueller. And to learn more about upcoming webinars, please visit awwa.org/webinars. On behalf of AWWA, I want to thank our panel and the audience for joining us today. Don't forget to participate in that survey, and until next time, thank you for keeping the water safe and secure. Goodbye all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily.
Of course.